how tough are you willing to get with a company? I use Tim Hortons as an example. By the way, they're majority foreign owners. Are you willing to call for a boycott of Tim Hortons? Are you willing to write a scorching letter to their CEO? Because I think if Canadians had like a Bud Light consumer rebellion, that would make these companies wise up. But if you're not going to get tough, if you're going to be diplomatic, I don't know if it's going to move the needle. How tough are you going to get?
Well, I know you're pretty tough, and you started that here. I have to be tough on the Liberals, right? That's why my constituents pay my salary. But again, I agree with you. Like these employers, like it's an egregious abuse of it. That's why Pierre put the Tim Hortons as the example on his announcement today. What was it, over 1,000? That was it.
Why she said, listen.
So, but what I can say is this, you want tough, you got to get tough for the House of Commons as well. So, Lena, I'm looking for you this fall.
Thanks for talking with us. There you have it.
Shame on you censorious thug.
I had another interesting day. I was invited to a Pierre Poilievre news conference about temporary foreign workers. I went to one the other day about crime, and I got a question in. I thought it was, I got a fairly good answer. So I went there today. The theme was immigration, and I went with my ears open. Let me play for you a video I recorded on the scene in Mississauga. Take a look.
I've always been against the temporary foreign worker program. In the past, it's been very limited. For example, some farmers claim they just literally can't get enough workers for a particular crop picking season, so they need the help. And I don't know, I suppose that rings true to me, but again, very limited. Time-specific, job-specific, not replacing Canadian workers as a general business strategy. That's exactly what's been happening in Canada the past 10 years under Trudeau. Like, temporary foreign workers are not temporary at all, and they've displaced a whole generation of young Canadians. Youth unemployment is out of control. And here in Mississauga, where the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, Michelle Garner-Rempel, and another MP, Garnet Genuis, had a news conference announcing their plan to, I'll say it in a word, scrap the temporary foreign workers program. You take a look at some of his comments.
Some very talented and hardworking people who cannot get jobs here in Canada. And let's be honest, young people today form what I call Generation Screwed. Let's look at the situation for this generation. It is the first generation that cannot afford a home in Canadian history. And now, the double gut punch. They have the highest or the worst employment numbers of any group of young people since the late 1990s. So you can't get a job, and even if you did have a job, you can never buy a home after 10 years of Liberal government. We have major problems in our job market. Let's look at the facts here. The unemployment rate for those aged 15 to 24 is now 14.6%. The employment rate, the share of young people who are employed, is at its lowest level in over a quarter century outside of the pandemic. 1.6 million Canadians were unemployed in July, 7.4% increase in unemployment insurance requests since Mr. Carney took office. Almost 400,000 Canadians have been continually searching for work for over 2 years, the highest share of long-term unemployment since 1998. There are 16,000 more people unemployed in Ontario than there were in the Great Recession. Ontario has seen a massive increase in job losses and a massive decrease in home building. Nearly 75% of temporary foreign workers that come into the country are for low-wage positions, which means they compete with working class and young people that ultimately drive down wages and drive away jobs. Tim Hortons has hired an unimaginable 1,131% more temporary foreign workers in the last 4 years. In the first half of this year alone, the TFW program has imported 74% more low-skilled labor than in all of 2015. TFWs, the number of temporary foreign workers, is now 2% of our overall workforce, and a staggering number, an unprecedented number. Now, the Liberals promised they would cap the temporary foreign worker program at 82,000, but in the first 6 months, they've already handed out 105,000 permits. Canadian jobs for Canadian workers. Canada first, Canada always. That's why Conservatives are calling on the Carney government to permanently scrap the temporary foreign worker program and to stop issuing visas for any new temporary foreign workers coming into the country. Under this proposal, existing permits would be wound down until the program is entirely eliminated. Canadian jobs will go to Canadian workers first. It's time that Mr. Carney took the job seriously of repairing the damage that his party has done.
Hi, Ezra Levant from Rebel News. I thought it was very interesting about booster juice paying $36 an hour to a foreign worker. And I think a lot of Canadians don't know how pervasive this is, and that's an outrageous anecdote. I don't think the Liberals are going to accept your advice here, so I think your reforms wouldn't be able to bite until you become Prime Minister if that happens. But I think there is something you could do in the meantime. And let me ask you if you would consider this. I'm actually just doing some brainstorming here. Would you consider shining a spotlight using your bully pulpit on the worst offenders? For example, maybe a company that really wraps itself in the Canadian flag, like Tim Hortons. Would you consider having an event outside of Tim Hortons? Would you consider writing to the board of directors of RBI and the Brazilian hedge fund? And I guess what I'm saying is there's no downside to these companies hiring foreign workers. But if there was a PR downside, if patriotic Canadians said, this is enough. I notice in the UK there's a lot of people waving British and English flags. It's their response to immigration crises. Would you consider naming and shaming in the public domain abusers of the TFW program?
Yes, and thank you for the question. Michelle Rempel has already begun the process. She's been publishing the most egregious cases of corporate elites profiting by shutting Canadians out of jobs in favor of low-wage temporary foreign workers. And Michelle, do you want to add anything to that? Sure. Come on over.
No, thanks for the question, Ezra. It's absolutely egregious that these companies expect that they can just maximize corporate profits on the backs of and at the expense of Canadian youth. It's a practice that has to end. We've been naming and shaming them all week. I want to thank my team for finding those examples, but I encourage Canadians to go and look for themselves. There's been websites that have been set up so that people can see what these companies are doing. But the more important thing is, Ezra, that the Liberals are letting them do this. The Liberals are totally letting them do this. You know, Lena Diab, where was she this summer, the immigration minister? Did she name and shame any of these people? No, she didn't. And that's why we're here today. We're standing up for the people that are behind us. Enough is enough. Canadian jobs have to go to Canadians.
Well, that's my theory, is that Pierre Poilievre has good ideas, but they're not necessarily going to become law until one day, if that Conservative Party becomes government. Temporary foreign workers, it would be possible to get that law passed with the current Parliament. Unlikely, because I think the Liberal Party won't do anything that Pierre Poilievre wants, but there is a component of the left that actually still cares about working people. And there is no greater threat than to the income of working people than bringing in cheap foreign labor specifically to undercut Canadian labor. I mean, it couldn't be clearer that is the purpose of temporary foreign workers. It once may have been about meeting a specific shortfall of a specific kind of worker for a specific period of time, but it's no longer that. It's just the mass importation of, I'm not going to say slave labor, but near slave labor competitors. So there may be some socialists and NDPers and blockists that actually support Poilievre's changes. I'm not so sure. But I think that shaming and naming the abusers of the system is something that might be able to get some change before then. Anyways, I went outside and I bumped into Michelle Gardner-Rempel, the immigration critic of the Conservative Party, and we spoke for a few minutes about her view. Here's how that went.
Nice to see you. Thanks for taking a moment with us.
Yeah, no problem. Nice to see you too.
I love the idea of naming and shaming because a lot of these companies really wrap themselves in the Canadian flag, and yet they have an anti-Canadian hiring plan. What can you do?
Well, you know, obviously I'm going to start by saying the Liberals are enabling this behavior, right? So we're starting with announcing that we're going to be very, very massively pushing for the abolition of this program in the House of Commons. So that's step one, right? Because you have to look at it from both ways. But yeah, I've already been out there looking at some of these really egregious examples. I actually think it was one of your reporters or editors had one that I was going to post yesterday. There's a school, a private school in I think it was Oakville, that was hiring a teacher as a temporary foreign worker. So yeah, of course these there used to be a social contract where employers would offer young Canadians, their first jobs. They would be, gaining and building a skilled domestic labor force. Like my first job was at an ice cream shop, right? I learned a lot of skills there, but that's not happening anymore. And so, yeah, these employers shouldn't be using this program. It should be abolished. But, from a parliamentary perspective, the Liberals shouldn't be allowing this, right?
I agree with you. And if the Conservatives form government, there'll be a lot of changes you can just make. But I think until then, your power is your rhetorical power, your mayoral power.
I was going to disagree with you a bit on that, because I actually think you can move the chains from the opposition bench. It is going to be very difficult. Well, I'm personally going to make it, and so is Pierre, very difficult for the Liberals to justify keeping this program. There's no justification for it. And I think that this is something that just resonates across party lines too, because there's people of all political stripes that can't find a job right now. So fair enough in terms of, it's been interesting to watch, just sort of average Canadians put little short videos on X, on YouTube, on different, I've seen them on Instagram, of just taking one of these posts. Like you can go on, there's numerous websites that are aggregating these jobs that are being offered, and then just showing them and going, well, I've seen Reddit posts, right? So everybody can do that. We will continue to do that, and I'm going to continue to hold the immigration minister to account.
How tough are you willing to get with a company? I use Tim Hortons as an example. By the way, they're a majority foreign owners. Are you willing to call for a boycott of Tim Hortons? Are you willing to write a scorching letter to their CEO? Because I think if Canadians had like a Bud Light consumer rebellion, that would make these companies wise up. But if you're not going to get tough, if you're going to be diplomatic, I don't know if it's going to move the needle. How tough are you going to get?
Well, I know you're pretty tough, and you started that here. I have to be tough on the Liberals, right? That's why my constituents pay my salary. But again, I agree with you. Like these employers, it's an egregious abuse of it. That's why Pierre put the Tim Hortons as the example in his announcement today. What was it, over 1,000? That was it.
Why she said this?
So but what I can say is this: you want tough, you got to get tough for the House of Commons as well. So, Lena, I'm looking for you this fall.
Thanks for talking with us. There you have. Yeah. That's Michelle Rempel Garner, the immigration critic for the Conservatives. Yeah.
Funny enough, after that press conference, she made a tweet showing me that indeed she was naming and shaming individual companies that were preferring foreign cheap workers to Canadian workers. In this case, she mentioned a particular pizza parlor. So I like the fact that they're willing to do that. Now, I think they can be tougher, and I think Rebel News itself may well have a role here. I just don't think it should be completely scot-free that companies can say, no, I'm not going to hire any Canadians. I'm going to bring in foreign workers to undercut them. I just don't think that should be allowed. And right now it is, shall we say, all the negative externalities are foisted on the community. So Tim Hortons can hire only foreigners. And what's the harm there? Well, the harm is to young Canadians who don't get a job. There's some other harm. I mean, customer service typically goes down. People feel alienated. But like I say, Tim Hortons can externalize all those problems onto the community. And since all the other companies are doing the same thing, no one really, it's the worst of all worlds. But if Tim Hortons or another company like that could be made to internalize the costs, if the community shunned them, if their revenues went down, if customers started to boycott them, then they would have pros and cons now for dealing with temporary foreign workers, not just pros. The cons would be patriotic Canadians simply refusing to do business with them. What I'm talking about is a consumer boycott like they had for Bud Light. Anyways, that was an interesting conversation with Pierre Poilievre and Michelle Gardner-Rempel, and I was glad I went there. And I suppose they had sort of talked about those things already, but I feel like I certainly clarified my own thinking about it, and I think I got them a little bit excited about going on the warpath using their bully pulpit against these companies. Anyways, I came back to the office, and what do you know? The regime media put to Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, Pierre Poilievre's proposals. And I thought, well, the Liberals have sort of walked away, at least rhetorically, from their extreme immigration. They're still going full tilt in reality, but they're now at least acknowledging they went too far. Boy, was I wrong. Mark Carney, I'll let you see it for yourself. Here he is saying he wants more cheap, foreign, exploitable workers, not less. He wants more temporary foreign workers. See for yourself. Take a look.
Mr. Poilievre called this morning on the government to scrap the temporary foreign worker program. Is it time to shut the program down?
Well, I would say the following, which is that that program has a role. It has to be focused in terms of its role. And it's part of what we're reviewing. It's part of what we will be discussing, how well the temporary foreign worker program is working and how our overall immigration system is working. We've been absolutely clear as a government that we want, and we're putting in place policies so that the overall level of immigration as a proportion of the population will decline from around 7% today to around 5% several years from now. Now, the biggest contributor to immigration is not temporary foreign workers. It's a variety of other factors. And I will say, et je vais répéter en français parce que c'est important, when I talk to businesses around the country, particularly in Quebec, but elsewhere across the country, their number one issue is tariffs, and their number two issue is access to temporary foreign workers. Okay? Et pour le moment, c'est une des grandes demandes du gouvernement du Québec, et c'est une des grandes demandes des entreprises québécoises. Il faut garder ce programme, pas éliminer ce programme. Alors, mais on peut, ce qui est clair, on peut améliorer le programme en total, ensemble de l'immigration. As a whole, it's clear that we can improve our overall immigration policies. We're working on that, and we're setting clear goals to adjust.
How tone deaf do you have to be? I mean, Mark Carney himself is an oligarch. I suspect he's a billionaire, given that he has 600 different companies in his portfolio. It's crazy. And he's asked about temporary foreign workers, and you just know where he's coming from because he says, well, actually, no, I asked all the big industrialists, I asked all the big employers in Quebec, and if anything, they want more foreign workers, so we're going to do it. Hang on, so you spoke to other billionaires and other oligarchs and other industries, and they all agreed cheap labor's better. So, well, case closed, I guess. I mean, it would be like saying, well, I talked to the landlords and they like high rent, so I'm just doing what they say. Well, you didn't take into account the other part of that, which is Canadians won't be hired. You're driving down wages. I mean, just the ease with which he just, oh, well, other billionaires like low wages, cheap labor, sort of a indentured servant class. So, duh, of course. There's not even a flicker of recognition that maybe there's other stakeholders in our community like Canadian citizens who might have a say. And there's no flicker of recognition that temporary foreign workers typically were brought in to help pick a crop that needed to be picked for a few weeks, and then it was done, and then they went home to, say, Mexico, where a lot of them came from. No, I reject the idea that you can bring in temporary foreign workers to just generally replace low-income workers and that first rung on the ladder of life. Those are in some ways the most important job. Which is the most important job in your mind? The first job that a young person gets that may be just above minimum wage, but it teaches them show up on work on time. If you're in the food service industry, in a clean uniform, hold your tongue if there's a customer service moment that frustrates you. Work for the good of the companies. Don't steal. Have some teamwork. Like, there's so much you learn in that first job that, 10, 20, 30 years later in life, you probably don't think of it that way, but it puts you on the path. And if we've cut out that first rung on the ladder of life and we've given away to foreign workers just to save, huge employers a few dollars an hour, that's just outrageous. I think that this is not just an economic battle and a way of solving our youth unemployment. It's a moral battle. Imagine saying, no, we prefer foreign indentured workers to our own. That's the Liberal Party today, at least under the billionaire oligarch of Mark Carney. Last point, I want to share with you a website that I was sent today that I did not know existed. And here, just take a look at it and we'll click through some of it. It is an official government website. This is not someone who set this up. This is the government of Canada. You can see by the web domain. And it has thousands of jobs for which they are hiring foreigners. And what's so interesting is it's everything. There's a job in there I saw for a psychiatrist. They're willing to pay up to $400,000. Are there no Canadians who will be a psychiatrist for $400,000? But you also have on the other end of the spectrum the most menial jobs, the entry-level jobs for a pittance. Basically, the entire country is for sale to foreigners who want to come here and to be entry-level or top-level, and you come straight into our country and basically buy your way in. If you're a Canadian citizen looking for work, well, it sucks to be you. I think this is a critical issue of our time. And let me quote Mark Andreessen, who was asked, why are so many young people communists these days? Why are so many people rejecting capitalism? I see it. I was in Montreal the other day and I literally saw posters on the street for communism. Now, of course, those were paid to be put up, but why is it appealing to people? Why is it ringing true? As Mark Andreessen said, young people, their only interaction with capitalism these days is negative. They'll never buy a house. They'll just be renters. They can't afford houses. They'll never be able to pay off their student debt. And in the United States, that debt, you can't erase it through bankruptcy. So your only experience with capital and capitalism is negative. You can never get out of debt. You can never save enough to buy a house. Your jobs will be pitiful. As the World Economic Forum says, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Well, they're not happy about it. We have got to realign things. You will not have support for a free market economy if you're bringing in the world's cheapest laborers to compete. And you will not have support for a free market economy if you're driving up the cost of housing so it's impossible for young people to start a family. There's so many terrible things going on rooted in this mass immigration. And I haven't even talked about what it's done to our universities and colleges with the education, international students. And a very interesting day out there certainly got me thinking. And I tell you, in the days and weeks ahead, look for more from us on this issue. I think we've got to start fighting back and, let Mark Carney have the oligarchs and the billionaires. I think there's just so many people, especially young people, who are just sick of it. Let's see if we can start a consumer revolution.